Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people watch our show, have family members on heroin, and there's a fair stigma to it, as you know. Can you explain what it's like, or can you identify with those people and maybe give them some words of comfort or encouragement? Or
Yeah.
I think the big problem with the stigma is the policy, that it's evident now that people from working class communities are getting a little bit more educated because there's pathways being set out for them, like you used to and me. We're setting pathways out for the next generation to go to university, become more educated, and challenge the standards of your culture. And the problem now is that like the policy makers in the country are kind of going, whoa, we've never been challenged like this before. So when we see that there's a huge correlation between people that struggle with drugs or addiction is due to mental health, well, then we must treat it as a mental health issue. So if we don't change from a legalize, I don't mean we have to legalize it, but we can decriminalize it like other countries have done it. And when we break down that, that guy there is struggling with heroin, but it's not against the law, he's just got mental health issues. Well, then we can start to change that stigma. There's a doctor, Sharon Lambert, you probably came across.
she's on the podcast last week.
Is she?
Yeah,
She's brilliant,
yeah.
really good, really interesting in what she's doing, work wise, research wise. But she had a study out, I think it was last year, the year before, and it was about the effects of families from a drug and alcohol related death. And she spoke about a family, a story that she took from a girl that basically her brother was a heroin addict, and sat down one night with her and her mum and said, "Mom, you won't have to worry about me anymore. Everything will be all right." And he went upstairs and didn't wake up the next day. He committed suicide, and that was obviously due to this the shame and stigma. That there's a huge amount of, especially heroin addicts, that will get to that point where they'll think that they've lost all self-worth, and that it's better off they're not hearing this. They're letting people down all the time, and that's not what, like, we need to, as a society, what we need the people that struggle with addiction, especially heroin addiction and other drug addictions, alcohol, whatever it may be, that we need to keep them on the planet long enough for them to hit rock bottom to ultimately make the decision to come off drugs. We, as a society, will ultimately not have the power to make somebody come off drugs. They have to want it themselves, but we need to have the support there for them. So that, I suppose, is why we have the stigma and shame. Years and years of being passed down that it's wrong to take drugs, it's against the law, so treat people really bad. And ultimately, when someone goes on that cycle of smoking cannabis, ecstasy, cocaine, crack cocaine, possibly heroin addiction, to being a functional addict, to being on the streets, being a homeless addict, to end up in prison because of that, to feed that 20 to 30,000 euro habit a year, that, there has to be a better process to that. Why have we not, as a country, not looked at saving, even if you don't care that you haven't got a family member or you haven't been in that situation, why haven't we as a government, as a country, looked at it and said, for every euro we spend on that young person, we're going to save €4? Like, why? And that's where my head is spinning. Is there too much money spinning around? Like, the guards have a really hard job, especially I see up in here in Dublin. You would have seen the series around the K. Even having the name the K is just it's a really bad name to stigmatise a community. But they are really under resourced. But I think the guards, when the Kinahan Hutch feud kicked off, I think there was €60 million worth of overtime spent in that area of our exchequer. 60 million extra for extra time, for overtime, for guards. So there's so much of this money spinning around that you have to question, who makes these decisions? Could we be spending all the money we incarcerate prisoners for, having, being imprisoned or incarcerated for having personal use of drugs? And they say they'll say there's not many. There's 16,000 incidents of it, right? But can we put that money into the health system because it's a mental health issue?
Yeah.
And we definitely have troubles with our healthcare system. So we need more money in that area anyway. But our courts will be less full. Our prisons will definitely be more. We'll only have drug dealers in prisons, because instead of focusing on people with personal use of drugs because it's decriminalised, we will be focusing on people selling the drug. The guards will be focusing on drug dealers.
Yeah.
They've
And
done
they will
that.
be the one in prison.
They've actually done that in Portugal.
Yeah.
They have decriminalised personal use. If someone's caught with drugs that are for personal use on them, they're left go. But if they're caught with a large quantity, and I think actually Sharon Lambert stated this in the podcast, that their death rate from people having overdoses and stuff for 1 year in the whole of Portugal was 2 people. And the
And
amount,
we have over one a day.
yeah, and the amount of money that they saved from bringing people through the courts and everything else associated with people getting arrested and brought to court, they were able to pump back into the system and help people with recovery and all these other things. Just to get
There's pros and cons to it, and like in everything, in terms of when you change something so big in terms of a culture, there's pros and cons to it, and people will say, oh yeah, but like, I mean, decriminalisation is a kind of a buzzword, and it gets the topic out there, it gets the narrative out there, it gets people speaking about addiction, which doesn't really happen otherwise in the media. Because not an awful lot of people like speaking about it, not a lot of people like coming out and speaking. So what you are doing is amazing, like coming out and speaking about your issues that you've had in the past and helping others look and go, there's 2 lads that have changed and went through adversity and look what they're doing now. Like, that's what we need, them peer guidance pathways. But ultimately what Portugal done really well was that they put a multidisciplinary approach around decriminalisation. So as you said, the money they were spending on incriminating people, they were actually putting into helping them and put into the healthcare system. So if you were caught with personal use, you were brought to a dissuasion committee in an office block, and not a guard station. You're brought in, you sit in front of, which I've been in for one of the meetings. The guy sits in front of the health expert and basically says, have you got a problematic drug issue? And he says, yes. Okay, you're going to get a fine. It's a small fine, but you're going to be given the opportunity to go to rehab.